Hi everyone.
Hello.
So one of my favourite zines from that bygone era called the 2010s was British Values here. Great cover, as you can agree. And the last DIY Cultures Festival, so I used to run a very big zine festival, which I still contend was the best zine festival of all time. Was anyone there from the... Sorry. Because I ran with Sophia Niazi, who runs Rabbit Road Press, so it's still... the sort of lifeblood of DIY cultures continues. And when I met the person who spoke at the final panel we did at DIY Cultures in 2017 was called Theresa May and the Others. And Kieran was the opening speaker at that panel. And then we met again, this year, many years later. And you felt disillusionment that your zine didn't change the world, and you become like a proper author now. This is like a book about housing and the houses you lived in. So what was a journey? So do you feel, what was a journey from this to this? How does this inform that? And how do you feel that your zine didn't change the world?
Well, I am a journalist by trade, so I'm not a visual thinker in the way that a lot of zine makers are. So I'm very impressed and amazed at the offerings today. But I feel like, as a result, I'm very inspired and tuned into what's happening politically and how that has ramifications on culture. And I felt like that anti-immigrant rhetoric of 2016, 17 and today really affected what newsrooms look like and what magazines look like and the internal workings of those spaces. And it felt very white, overwhelmingly white and very middle class. And so there wasn't even a working class representation that was diverse. It felt like it was the same person over and over again.
And you've actually been in the belly of the beast of the mainstream. You've actually been in the heart of the devil, which is the BBC.
That's how I know.
You know who really runs BBC Asian Network?
Yeah, lots of white men.
And you're also part of the underground. For sale as well.
So it felt important to me to do Zine, which is an independent way of speaking about what is happening politically and speaking about how lives are being affected, and also speaking about the experience of being a diasporic Indian person. So, I grew up in Britain, so a lot of the jokes are British focused about page 3 and Stop Me I Avoid, and some of the jokes are about what's happening culturally, but also linked to my journalistic experience and background, which was let's have a feature, let's have an op-ed. Those are really important. Let's really report what's happening. And so I think the merging of those two showed that, people from global majority backgrounds are funny, number one. And also they're not only contributing labour. And I think that there's an overwhelming narrative that immigrants contribute labour and nothing else. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more when we talk about the book. But, I wanted to make that point over and over. And actually, I think that point is worth repeating. And it has been repeated historically. And I think it needs to be again and again. And it continues to be. And it makes a small difference. I don't think it changed the world, but I think it made a small difference in people's minds, and that's what the book aims to do as well.
One of the so this is the book, and you were also inspired. So you see this. So the corner of the reading room in the back, it's all themed around the book. So one of the things she inspired you was the Bengali squatters. So when I did DIY cultures, I wasn't just thinking of zines or these indie publications, but DIY was a way of, there was a politics, a way of being together, a way of thinking about society. You know, you thought of Bengalis and South Asians as this very sensible, square, stereotype person. So you didn't never put the squatter, which you associate with this anarchist with dreadlocks, with like Bengali. But how did the Bengali squatters inspire you and this book? And
well, I think
a lot of books and houses.
yeah, lots, and a lot of them had, some erasure of the political fights of South Asian and Black thinkers. And I just want to read a list of people, because we were talking earlier about globalized connections, and I think that's so important when we talk about the history of housing activism in this country. Like, a lot of those thinkers were people who were immigrants who brought what they knew with them over to the UK. And often, like I said, there's this understanding that you just bought your labour, but actually that intellectual political thinking informs a lot of the activism that we do today, we continue to do, that affected the housing activism throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s and today. And when I go to a lot of housing meetings and housing organisations, a lot of these kind of thinkers are name checked. So I'll just let you know some of them. With special mention to the United Coloured People Association, the Jamaica Labour Party, the Black Parents Movement, West Indian Independence Party, the Antigua, Barbados and St Kitts and Nevis labour movements, and OWAD. So when we talk about the Indian Workers Association, how integral they were to housing people that didn't feel like they could be housed, namely lots of Bengali people, but South Asian people across the global South, I feel like they were important, but also there were lots of groups who were making that possible. And so we talk about the politics of housing activism, but also we have learned through the archives that a lot of people that maybe would not consider themselves big P political were. A lot of the women who were enabling people to be political by being wives, mothers, by providing food, by providing childcare, by slowly putting on a cardigan on top of their sari and going outside town hamlets to basically flood the courts, as we talk about it today, but to show that there was a mass of people who were not happy with their current living conditions. And I think that we can learn a lot from that, and we continue to be moved and activated and mobilized by those actions. So, those people individually might have felt small, but they were doing big political work that we feel the ramifications of.
One of my favourite bits in the book is where you sort of look at objects differently, and so what is considered trashy or tacky becomes something else. One of the best books, there's a tissue box, that's the centerpiece of one of the opening chapters, which is a standard, and you have this whole epic history that goes from
Mm-hmm.
partition to the moguls to through just this little walk to the tacky tissue box. But yeah, tell us more.
In the writing of the book, I interviewed a number of psychologists, and they made the distinction between linking objects and objects that have memories, basically. And so they were linking objects are objects that you might buy because they take you to an abstract time and space. So you don't buy them and thinking of the rainy day that you bought it from Bookstore Market for a £5 necessarily. You're thinking about growing up in Punjab, or you're thinking about my family are Punjabi. You're thinking about, what is on the TV in India, you're thinking about the temperature. So you have to make the distinction between memory objects of like having a fun day at Alton Towers and buying a magnet and putting it on your fridge, and every time you look at that magnet taking you back to that fun day that you had, and linking objects which don't necessarily take you to that day, but they take you to something more expansive. They take you to something more abstract and more beautiful. And I thought that's really important to say, because we know that a lot of immigrant homes are full of those linking objects, are full of places that only exist in the memory, especially when we talk about conflict zones. And I know that's a big conversation at the moment in terms of how people return to Gaza after unimaginable devastation. And sometimes your objects in your home remind you of something that doesn't necessarily exist anymore, will never exist in the same way, but it existing in that abstract dream space is really important, and that is made concrete by physical objects in your home, whether that's a tacky fake gold tissue box or something else. I think it's important.
Where are you currently living?
Well, I'm living in Streatham.
We met just recently.
Well, you're in Tooting, so, you know, we're quite close.
Yeah, it's SW16.
Yeah. And before then I was in Brixton, so obviously that has a deep activist history and a deep housing activist history. And so I was partly inspired by that, but I was inspired a lot by going to tenants unions and renters unions. So I'm a member of the South London branch of the LRU, London's Renters Union. And there's also Hassel, Housing Action, Southwark and Lambeth. So they're my two regulars. And they make zines. Some of them are just photographic because not everyone is a English speaker, and they understand living in a mold infested damp room, and they understand what that means, and sometimes they just need someone to be like, okay, what do I do into this scenario? And tenants unions are really great for doing that admin work, for being like, I have a certain amount of privilege, I can speak English, maybe I can write an email, maybe we can think about what we have and what can be shared. And suddenly you open up a world that you felt like was so close to you. And whether that's a housing association, whether that's a landlord, whether that's being a homeowner and being like, well, I've kind of achieved the immigrant dream of home ownership, and so I can't complain about anything. I can't complain about structural weakness or racism from the neighbours next door because I've kind of made it. And tenants unions are really good at being like, okay, but maybe we can think about other things. And that's kind of feedback that I get a lot from talks after my book, is like, I'm a homeowner, like it's a dirty word. And people come up to me like, how can I help renting? How can I help social housing? How can I help with temporary accommodation? Because I'm a homeowner. And it's like, well, there's lots that you can do. You can't necessarily buy a castle and raise up the drawbridge. And there's a way to do that by attending renters unions and being like, okay, here's what I can do, here's what I have, let me hear how I can contribute. And whether that's sending the estate agents lots of emails and lots of complaints, that stuff works. Or whether it's like just being physically present, or whether that's linking arms when a bailiff comes to your home, like all of those things are really important. And so all of us have a role to play when it comes to providing home for everyone.
One of the things about creative economies is that sometimes and we're building a creative economy in this area, and there hasn't been one. It's this thing about gentrification, and the word zine used to be associated with like hipsterism. And how is a creative economy necessarily a good thing in that wider?
Well, I think that people from the South Asian diaspora particularly are talking about underreported things that happen in their lives. So everything from the political representation of things happening to them to being like, I'm just a person in the world and this is how I'm experiencing that. And let me produce some art that talks about that. And this building is full of that. It's full of people being like, let me produce art to tell a story about my life. And suddenly people outside of that are like, oh, that's the country that we live in. Oh, that's the way that you feel. Oh, this is what kind of creative economy that you're a part of. And I feel like, you know, zines have always been powerful for that, not only because of labour movements, which they are integral for and have been important for factory work and, you know, striking action, but for also being like, what does it look and feel like to be outside the mainstream, or to feel like you're outside the mainstream? What is the experience of that? And people are telling you all the time. People are saying all the time what that is. And so I don't think there's any excuse for people being like, oh, I didn't know that. It's like, what do you mean? Yes, you do.
So I think we'll, is there any passages from the book that you would like to read before we open up?
No.
Okay.
But I do want to say one other thing about creative economies and say that, you know, the reason that we know, or that we have an archive, we know what happened historically with various groups of POCs, is because someone was diligently taking notes or documenting it in some way, even if it was just a paragraph. Even if it was just a picture of the living room that people gathered in. You know, those things are so important because 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, we're revisiting that, and we're revisiting everything from a paper trail of noise complaints because you had your shebeen in your house to something like this, to an unofficial organisation of a collective of people and someone saying, let me just document that this happened. And even though it might feel inconsequential in the moment, in the future it won't. And it kind of establishes us as people that advocate for real change and for real political hope. And I think that sometimes you need that when you are aware of so much devastation. You're like, this is a very hopeful space. This is a very hopeful moment. There are people that want to make the world a better place, and that's something to hold on to.
And there are people in this audience who want to make the world a better place. So if anyone would like to add to the conversation or talk about their experiences with housing or point of view. All right. So the experience about housing justice, please have any questions. I'm actually curious because you bought quite a lot of zines. We bought a lot of zines from Bombay Underground. So this is a zine about home made with slum children from Mumbai, and this is a reflection home. Where do you put your zines in your house? These endless shoeboxes, or?
Well, yeah, on my coffee table I have like countless zines, and they're stacked up, and I'm like, oh, you can't see them. Like, what is a better way to display them for visitors or for people that want to just pick them up and flick through? But my sister is younger than me. And when she sees them displayed, she's like, oh, can I take this? Can I take this? So, you know, I have to strike a balance of not being too
I've actually lost lots of zines at the bottom of a tote bag.
Yeah, see, I can't do that.
Tote bag. So the room I want a room like that room there in my house, just full of. So that's my zine collection over 30 years. The way I actually store zines is I buy this long. A lot of them are in my cupboard, and I get this. There's this thing. It's made for storing purses or luxury purses or something like that. And I put it in the cupboard, and then I put each of these tough boxes, and that is actually how my zine collection is stored in my house, as well as my parents' garage and attic.
Maybe I should do that, because
and then this gives like a room like that gives a sort of opportunity for the zines to breathe as well.
Yeah, because some of my zines are like light faded.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh no.
Oh my god.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll take that on board.
Hi, my name's Seneca. I trained as an architect, and I help residents come up with alternative plans for regeneration, people's plans. So I am surprised each time I go to like an area of regen. Not surprised, it's obvious, but sometimes things do even take me aback. So there's a famous estate called Robin Hood Gardens near Blackwall Tunnel. And so the first time I went, I hadn't been there for I've always heard about it, Streets in the Sky, modern living. And when you met families who lived there, they enjoyed the space, the light, the wide, it was not even walkways, that you could drive a milk float back in the day. So my question is, like, when communities actually say, we want to live here, we love our community, but yet, like market forces are saying, no, you need to densify. And these are the areas that are densifying. So the similar things are happening like Tower Hamlets, Lambeth, definitely Southwark. That just been, if you're a tenant, you're given a website to like bid for a place. And even like if you're a leasehold, if you bought into the dream of owning your own home, right to buy, Margaret Thatcher policy, you can't buy back into that area. And they are targeting, inner cities, what Hamja was saying, with gentrification. But I was just wondering, like, future, yes, people's plans are one of the things, but how can communities say, well, actually, no, we want to support our neighbors, like you were saying, hand in hand, stopping these forces coming in and just, really, socially and ethnically cleansing areas.
Well, we know that the way that housing looks, particularly in London, but in cities throughout the UK, is very closely tied with capitalist market forces. So I think there's two things. Like, one is understanding that the state and central government is an effective way to make some change, but not the only way. So I do think that there needs to be some political will to stop rampant unregulation of property developers and those things that will densify areas that make it really difficult for communities who love where they live to exist. But I also think that aside from using central government, having all those things, like a right to return, whatever, is understanding that there are housing organisations that do make indentations to current housing thinking and current housing proposals. Like, that doesn't go far enough, but it has. So like the Renters' Rights Bill, for example, only came about because of the work from Shelter and Acorn and various other housing activists saying, I don't think that it's right that a no-fault eviction exists, so someone can just basically be turfed out of their home. I don't think that that is right. And then suddenly, after years and years, the government are like, yeah, maybe that's true. But that wouldn't exist if it were not for the work of tireless housing activists. So sometimes you can see those things as very separate, and sometimes they overlap. But I think it's really important to advocate for both. And in my experience, that doesn't always happen. So we know the things that need to change for central government. We know the things that housing activists are working towards for safer, cleaner homes. It's interesting when you talk about being an architect and, designing future homes, because, that radical imagination exists in those activist spaces of being like, what would you want your home to look like? What do you want it to be like? How accessible could it be? How much larger could the door frames be? What would it mean to rent long term in a home that was fit for human habitation, let's say? Suddenly those ideas filter into what central government are talking about. And so not all of them doesn't go far enough, but it's really important to keep pushing and keep the pressure on. And when it feels like it's too much, maybe someone else can take over, and then you take over. And, that kind of collective space that, we know and feel is really important, real solidarity by being like, we've been fighting housing fight for 30, 40, 50 years. People are going to feel burnt out by that, but it's important to keep pushing, I think. Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Rahul Patel, and I've lived in Brixton nearly all my life, from the age of 10. Obviously, it's changed from the uprisings, the sus laws, what took place in education and everything like that. I just want to mention a couple of things. You talk about resistance in terms of housing. Some really fantastic stuff has been happening in Southwark recently. Actually, this week, there's an organisation called 35% and also Defend Council Housing. But together, they pushed back the new plans for the Aylesbury estate, unanimously rejected, because the developers, nasty people, wanted to reduce the social housing from probably 5 units to 1. There's normally not many, but they pushed back their plans, and that's been happening for a long time. So I kind of agree with you on that. In terms of the zines and where we kind of keep them, because at one level we're fairly individualized, right? Hamja's not going to allow me to go to his bedroom, and we're not going to come to your coffee table, and that sort of stuff. And I do value archives and libraries, right? And I work at the University of the Arts, London, and they have at LCC, London College of Communication, the largest zine collection in Europe, right? Which is Yeah, that's you. So there's.
My personal collection, I'm saying literally, my personal collection is actually larger than.
Okay, good. Well, what I would suggest is both of you get together and make it even larger than what it is. And I think it's very important. I totally agree with you, the issue of documentation. Documentation is so important because actually the majority of the ideas are the ideas of the dominant class, and we get wiped out from history in that kind of sense. And it's important around when we say decolonize, resist, that we actually bring out our own kind of histories as well. But I think the danger is also appropriation, right? In that kind of one, there's this kind of a sanctification of our own journeys, but also by big kind of corporate organizations. So how do we kind of keep that creativity in that? And that tension is there. Amongst ourselves as well, but the class tensions as well in terms of what's taking place. So absolutely brilliant zines in that, and they're so actually, around immigration, around small boats, around the nasty stuff that's happening in Epping and places like that. I think it's so important that we're also resisting in large numbers there as well. In that interesting stat that came out in The Guardian today, they said that the people who were arrested for the not riots, but pogroms last year nearly 40% of them have either convictions or been reported to the police for domestic abuse. Right. Okay. So that's kind of interesting in that kind of sense of who's behind that, what kind of people are there, in that way. So we need to kind of be thinking about it. But it's really good to hear. You said everywhere you lived, you've obviously lived more than Brixton and Streatham. Where else?
I have experienced temporary accommodation and social housing, and also like private renting, and lots of housemates and lots of moving around. And I went to Goldsmiths.
You went where?
Goldsmiths. Sorry.
That's all right, half our staff.
And, you know, it's really interesting to see the kind of housing stock that was available for the student housing there, and also in the majority of UAL, because suddenly, yes, property developers are part of that, but also the places, the locality that you live is seen as very different. Like the student living and the local living are seen as two different things, as opposed to things that are integrated. And, you know, sometimes seeing that close up makes you recognise things. But there's just two things that I wanted to say when you were talking. One is that, you know, it's important for us to recognise that we should not accept the terms that have been given to us. So whether that's poor housing or whether that's a disgusting immigrant rhetoric, we can always push back, and people are pushing back all the time and winning. And that is kind of a narrative that we're not told. You know, people are like living in fear, obviously, rightly so. When you hear that rhetoric, of course you respond that way. But, you know, it's important to remind us that people are winning all the time, and people are finding creative ways to do that, and are gathering and are finding solidarities. And I think that's really powerful and effective. And also when you talk about the kind of corporatization of a minority experience, I think that for me, a way to combat that is through a left-wing socialist rhetoric. So we know that brown capitalism exists, and exists in a big way. And I'm always surprised, for example, when I see brown people in Instagram that have accepted an MBE or an OBE or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm a journalist, so, you know, I see more of that than most. But I think that has to be combated by your own politics and sharing with other people that maybe think differently to you, and being like, there is an alternative way, not to be brown, but to think about the world that we live in. And this is making it more difficult for the majority of us. What do you think about that?
And brown politicians, Suella Braverman and what's her name, Patel, disgusting.
They're all babies of brown hyper-capitalism and brown neoliberalism.
There's also a tribute to Sadiq Khan.
Is that why it's your favourite zine? Yeah. Teens finest.
Still our mayor. Actually used to be my local MP.
They went to a local school here as well.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Were you the same one? No, okay.
I'm on the Nextdoor app. Do you know what those? No. It's like a snitch app for your neighbours, basically. But it's so Islamophobic about Sadiq Khan.
Oh, wow.
It's like Sadiq Khan's agenda, if you know what I mean. It's like, well, what agenda are you talking about? It's really like, you know, people that you live within. That's what I mean about knowing the country or the city or the road even that you live in. Suddenly you're like, you seem okay, but I guess you're not okay, because my Nextdoor app is only like 4 roads and it's very Islamophobic. Okay. And that is valuable to me to be like, okay, you are thinking those kind of things, and that's how that kind of narrative and rhetoric persists, and that's how it lives, and it's really important to challenge that at every point, I think.
A lot of the book is a tribute to your mum and what a great improviser she was.
Yeah, I think that, mum is very typical in the way that she had an arranged marriage at 18, and then that marriage broke down, and then she got disowned by my grandparents, her parents. And so when you have had that experience, you suddenly are like, oh, I'm really single. I'm single. And I think that, if you've been housing precarious at a young age, that follows you actually throughout your whole life. And so I think that kind of assembling different places is part of that kind of necessity, of being like, okay, this is what I have to do. I have to do it. And then, as me as a child, I'm just like along for the ride. And so I'm able to look at things in a more beautiful way sometimes than I expect that she could, because she was like, okay, how are we going to live here? How much does it cost? What does it mean? And I'm like, this neck curtain's so beautiful, And so, I think both perspectives are valuable, actually.
Thanks so much for the talk. It's really good. I just wanted to follow on from what Rahul was saying about sort of the corporatization of the experience of the diaspora. I mean, I came to this country when I was 18 from Pakistan, and I've got a lot of family who've done similar things, maybe to the US, but some to the UK as well. And it's kind of related to what you were saying about linking objects and how sometimes the diasporic experience sort of relies on products and commodities to recreate a sort of the experience of being back home, whether it's Rubicon or tissue boxes. I found that very evocative of what you said. And I think that speaks to an underlying, how people respond to the insecurity of being in a new country. There's definitely a class element at play, but by participating in the system, by buying the commodities, by regarding their own culture as a monolith. And I wonder how you feel about how one could engage that in a dialogue better, because sometimes people literally feel like they don't have any skin in the game.
I don't know. I feel like, as a journalist reporting on this issue a lot, I've been in lots of immigrant homes. And so I've kind of seen those commodities, yes, but also like just pictures. So just like imprints of that commodity, whether that's an image of Mecca or the Golden Temple, or whether that's a physical thing that you bought for £1 at the pound shop that reminds you of something. And so, I understand it, especially when you feel minoritized all the time. And that is overwhelming rhetoric, that you're nothing, that you don't exist. You want to be like, I do exist. And actually, part of the way in Punjabi communities anyway, the aesthetic was formed was through a sharing culture. So it's like, okay, I have just moved to this country, and then another Punjabi person, maybe not even part of your family, will be like, here's the tablecloth, here's this, here's a rug, here's this. And then suddenly, like, a lot of Punjabi houses look the same. And when I was younger, I was like, oh, all houses look the same. And actually, it's a uniform. It's about self-preservation. It's about protection. It's about saying, this is who we are. This is really important to us. And, we're not going to let anyone take that away from us. Now, I think the fight is more, it is racism, of course, but now the fight is more like, no, corporatization of our experience is something that can be pushed back against. And so that is a fight that I fight often. And maybe not for everyone, but for a lot of people, I think that's an important fight to say, okay, you're maybe just looking at something and making an assumption about something. And some of those voices have to say no. And that is really difficult when there's lots of money on the table, let's say. But I think that in the long run is the most important thing. Like, I don't have a lot of money, but I understand that it's important to say no to some things because, you know, in 5 or 10 years' time, maybe that'll look more beautiful. So, yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that there are small things that we can do. And, you know, my position of privilege is maybe say no to money and brand association. Maybe that's not the case for everyone, but that's certainly how I think about those things.
I wanted to ask what your dream for housing would be in this country, like what the ideal structure would be for you.
Well, I believe in a universal basic income, and so I believe that, you know, that will feed into housing for everyone. So we know that there's an abundance of housing that exists. So people that are unhoused, that live on the street, maybe like at the point of acute crisis, we can put some people in hotels or whatever. So if you start from the COVID model of everyone being inside, which we know is possible because that's been done, suddenly we can begin to think seriously about new housing opportunities. And again, I think that is about a complete rethinking of the current offerings that exist. So the current offerings that exist for renters is new builds. We know that new builds have a short lifespan. We know that maybe they're not built with strength to last. We know that after 10 years, they usually have quite significant structural problems. So what else could we do? What else can we think about? And I find it so inspiring to be in those rooms where people are saying, well, I would like this. I don't want damp and mold and thin walls and inaccessible door frames or inaccessible stairs or, you know, no handrails in my house. Like, what would that look like? I don't want the terms of like having a long-term rental property to mean like, well, will come with loads of other things. You have to deal with loads of other things, but you have a certain amount of rent control. It's like, no, what would it mean to drastically rethink how that can work for people? And I think that is thanks to a lot of people from various organizations feeding in and saying, you know, I'm thinking of Disordinary Architecture, of disabled activists being like, this is what houses could look like in terms of accessibility. And then suddenly you're like, okay, how else can it look? And lots of other organizations are saying, maybe it can look like this, maybe it can look like this. So I think that there are lots of ideas, good ideas of how housing can look, but I think that the way that that's funded by central government is by funding it properly and not being like, well, the unregulation of property developers is very expensive, and being like, there has to be other alternatives. Like, if you nationalise the whole of housing, you would have 1 million people on the social housing list. Like, your desire to privatise in such an expensive way means that lots of people can't afford to do that. And so, you know, there's countless answers to that. But, you know, ultimately, people shouldn't look at any city and be like, that is too expensive for me to exist within it, and too expensive for me to be part of a creative economy, too expensive for me to be with like-minded people that are like me because I'm worrying about other things. And so that is a challenge for all of us. And what can we do in a small way to contribute towards that positively?
Just to kind of ask from that, you're talking about that kind of structures of creative economies being contributed by social housing as well.
Yeah.
How do you stop the Section 106 kind of basically legalized bribery? Have you seen kind of systems that are alternative to that, where people are able to form structures of creative or community asset building within house building that isn't just how do we get rid of our actual responsibility to a community, which is Section 106 in my experience? I don't know.
I've seen it, but it's often very white and very middle class. So, for example, I've seen like the TP Valley in Wales, that is a community of people that want to live outside society as it stands, or definitely an urbanized kind of society, but it's self-regulated. And there are lots of communities like that. Like I'm thinking of Hebden Bridge, I'm thinking of lots of boat communities when they commune and talk about things. I'm talking about the current wave of squatting. I'm thinking about all those things, but I don't see myself within that. And so I think the question that I often ask is like, okay, how does that work for people that are demonized for being working class or for being PSEs? How does that fit into this utopian idea of living? Because often there is a kind of utopian community, but it's very one kind of person being replicated. And it's like, if you're not part of that, then what are you part of? And I was thinking a lot about that in terms of Extinction Rebellion and how white it was, and the communities of people that lived locally. Because like we have a shared politics, we have a shared outlook on climate issues. It's very important. And then, you know, a lot of that was a very distinct kind of person, generally white and middle class, that fetishized arrest. And so that has changed, and people have broken off into various points, but they don't have the financial ability to like live near other Extinction Rebellion, India or West Africa, for example. So I wonder what that looks like. I just wonder what that looks like. But I think that the question to ask is, how can I make that more accessible to me and more welcoming to me?
What is Section 106? 106. Sorry.
Where developers are asked to contribute to a community, and quite a lot of arts organisations use that now. So you'll find lots of artist studios are set up in conjunction with a developer, or let's say a museum is set up underneath a luxury housing development because that the council have asked them to contribute to the community. And I think it's a really dangerous place to be, because a lot of them then just go, oh, well, it's back to that question of art washing. It's like,
Do you
well,
have
we
examples locally where that's...
Locally here, the interesting one was like there was supposed to be a heritage centre in Wandsworth Town, and which was supposed to be set up by the Ram Brewery development, and they had to have that through Section 106, and then they spent probably hundreds of thousands on lawyers trying to get rid of it so they can maximise luxury housing. And it's that thing of, and then it became very watered down, and then it's not really a community asset anymore. It's just this like vague thing. And then they paid artists to do community projects, and then it was also really like, yeah, as you said, it's that kind of led by this very white middle class agenda, but it doesn't become part of the community anymore. So this is I find a lot of arts organisations rely on Section 106, especially with studio spaces. That's how they get affordable studio spaces, and it's kind of precarious in that sense as well. So that's why I was kind of curious, like, are there alternatives to Section 106? Have you seen it successful?
Well, I think this is an alternative. I think spaces like this are alternatives, but maybe not financially resourced to have longevity. So I think that people will always try and build a space for community, but whether or not that's funded is kind of
like land trusts as a way for people to own and have control and regulate in a way that's fair.
Yeah, I think there should be like heavy taxation on land trusts, but yeah, that's true. But again, it has a very...
It's perceived as like a fairer way to govern and keep property prices fair. Like in Liverpool, it's run by working class communities, use the idea of becoming a land trust to maintain and make their community stay affordable and to stop it being gentrified.
Yeah. I think that, like, that's a movement towards some kind of change. I don't necessarily think it's a perfect solution, but it's something. You're doing something. That's all I'll say about that.
So thank you, Kieran, for all her insights. Do read her book, which you can read many more of her confessions. The Zine British Values, there's only a few left in the world, which is a classic of the 2010s. It's available on the communal table, and also these beautiful zines about housing and home, written in the slums of Mumbai, are also available on the table opposite the communal table. And Kieran will be around for a while if anyone wants to talk to her. The book is available as an audiobook on Spotify and all those available streaming platforms. And I listened to the whole thing from my 9-hour coach journey up until Glasgow Zine Fair. It's very, if you want to be in the company of such a sweet, endearing, charming, intelligent, insightful person, I'd recommend that too. But not long megabus coach journey. Okay, thank you. The next talk is at 5 p.m. And that's about decolonial education. And we have a speaker from the student encampment who's released a new publication, Amrit Wilson, who's my radical auntie, who does South Asian Solidarity. She'll be talking about her magazine archive. Brick Lane Circle, who's been central to my education, and the youngest artist in the whole thing, who painted this painting trilogy around the Colina diamonds. So come again at 5 p.m. The whole exhibitions and archives and reading rooms are open till the 14th of August, so encourage all of you to come back and hang out and make zines and play garam. So thank you.
Thank you.